I have chosen a topic which is very controversial in the present political climate of the country. But nevertheless, I chose to address it because somehow I feel that I'm also located within the vortex of that kind of conflict which is now taking place. And seeing it or analyzing it through the lens of biopolitics and necropolitics will in some way try to understand how it is functioning, how citizenship and how identity are related, and it will help us to understand the situation better. I'm not taking sides, so I'm not conclusive, or I'm not also giving out solution to the problem. I'm just trying to deconstruct in a way that how the things have been taking place and how things could be related. So how do I see this the citizenship and identity issue to this idea of biopolitics? How do I relate it? Now, in the previous sessions, some questions were raised. Somebody asked Professor Panos, he is here, if biopolitics can be traced into the time of Aristotle. Then Professor Sudhir Kumar, who during his keynote address challenged the very Eurocentric discourse on biopolitics, terming such an approach as incomplete in understanding life. He rather considered that biopolitics is important, but not as but only as an ancillary. It is not the main concern. It is only an ancillary to the many ideas associated to seeing life and politics, in which he considered that the Indian view of life perceived through dharma actually leaves no room for the dualistic principles which informs the Western academia. So there are many ways of talking and referring to or relating to the idea of biopolitics. If we go to the coinage of the word, that when it was coined, if we consider the term biopolitics as was intended by Rudolf Schellan, um, we see that it is closer to the Aristotelian view. He forwarded the organistic concept of a state, where the state is like a super individual. Uh, like we are individuals, but the state is made out of many individuals. So he terms it like super individual. According to him, the natural form of statehood is, say, nation state, which expresses itself in ethnic individuality. Rudolf gives an organistic concept where he views state not as a legal construction, but as an original form of life which precedes individual. So the state comes before the individual, but this form of state is indeed problematic as we see it today, because after colonization, after slavery, after mass movement of people from one place to another, the idea of ethnic individuality and also the notion of Aristotelian polis will have many challenges. So in the present context, talking about ethnic individuality is really problematic because nations are becoming multi-ethnic. But Rudolph's analogy of life in understanding the state is worth considering. And I would quote him, he says, in view of this tension typical of life itself, the inclination arose in me to baptize this discipline after the special science of biology as biopolitics. In the civil war between social groups, one recognizes all too clearly the ruthlessness of the struggle for existence and growth, while at the same time one can detect within the groups a powerful cooperation for the purposes of existence. So there is the requirement of a kind of mutual existence. There is the requirement of a kind of cooperation so that life can be promoted. It should not be cut short. So in this relation now, can we actually consider the Indo-China or Indo-Pak relation within this view of international biopolitics? So this is the kind of question which comes to my mind. Or can we see and understand the conflicts among the various communities within India, and can we actually address them through this lens of biopolitics? Now, there are other theorists who have also tried to explain biopolitics through the lens of ecology and theology. Um, Now, we have this German political scientist, Dietrich Gunst. According to him, biopolitics embraces anything to do with health policy and the regulation of population, together with environmental protection and questions concerning the future of humanity. So life and survival becomes important for Dietrich. And according to him, the problems can be solved through a life-oriented politics. So it doesn't talk about death. So why do I speak about necropolitics? I'll come to that. I'm trying to relate it. So life is important according to Dietrich as well. Then we have Kenneth Couthen, who tried to relate biopolitics with ecology and spirituality within a Christian framework. Thus, we see the application of biopolitics in various ways of interpreting life and politics. Seeing these various aspects, will it be then erroneous to state that the biopolitics was relevant in Greece, where actually I was talking to Panos about this yesterday, that in Greece, the manual laborers or the aliens were considered to be essential part of the polis, but they were not allowed to participate in the politics of the polis. So can we review the biopolitics there? So Panos was saying like, but there is a scope, it is wide open, you have the opportunity, it's very liberal, it is a democratic society where you can really work hard and come up to be a part of that. So that was open and ended in a way. Nevertheless, I feel there is also a way of seeing that how life has been controlled in Greece. So is this not a kind of regulating the people according to the requirement of the state? So that will be the question in relation to Greece. Or I say, will it be erroneous to state how human body and its identity is crucial? Consider the role of eunuch in the Mughal era, and how in the post-colonial society it is trying to situate the existence of eunuch in the films, in the media, in the society, how it is being portrayed. What is the role of the eunuch in the public imagination today? So all this could well be the subject of biopolitics. I think it is a very broad area, and I'm trying to gauge the numerous possibilities in the use of the term itself. And I will now come down to Foucault. He says, uh, Thomas Lackme, I'll be quoting Thomas from Thomas Lackme's book Biopolitics, where he states about Foucault. Thomas Lackme states that Foucault analyzes the historical process by which life emerges as the center of political strategies. So it is life which emerges as the center of political strategies. It doesn't talk about death either, till now. So biopolitics denotes a specific modern form of exercising power, and the inception of modernity into the Indian scene, with the coming of the colonization, actually we can say that it was the inception of modernity into the Indian scene. A lot of things were changed since then. So it is the inception of modernity in the Indian scene which gives the valid ground in understanding how biopolitics has entered into the state functioning in India. Therefore, biopolitics in Indian context has to be understood in contiguity to its colonial past. We cannot understand biopolitics by separating today's India from its colonial past. They are contiguous, they are related. Foucault starts his analysis with the sovereign's power over life and death. If you have read Madness and Civilization, you will see how the church, the monarchy, or the upcoming bourgeois, later on, exerted its power in regulating and controlling the socially deviant population, which was a transformation from the medieval times, where the deviant were cast into the sheep of fools. So in the medieval times, we see that in the sheep of fools, the deviant, the mad people, broadly categorized, they were sent away to meet their death in the world of darkness. But that had changed in the post-enlightenment world. It has transformed a lot since then. And I personally believe there are historical reasons for that, although Foucault doesn't mention it categorically in his Madness and Civilization, but nevertheless I can see a connection in that. I think it is the beginning of colonization also at that time, which gave the state an opportunity to expand. And instead of sending out, these deviant people at other places, they were housed within that that symbolic, that hospital general in France, and there were such workhouses located in England as well, where these people were housed and they were made to work and they were made to produce things. So there was a capitalism which was already starting to function, and there was a displacement from monarchy. It was gradually coming towards a kind of republic, a kind of democratic society. So there was this shift also, and this is perhaps the reason why Foucault states. He says, I'm quoting from him, it is no longer a matter of bringing death into play in the field of sovereignty, but of distributing the living in the domain of value and utility. See these two words, value and utility. So the shift was already taking place at that time in Europe. People were talking about utilitarian way of life, Bentham's idea and Mill's idea of utilitarianism was coming into power. Such a power has to qualify, measure, appraise, and hierarchize rather than display itself in its murderous splendor. So it has nothing to do with ending life in the beginning, and I mean in the post-enlightenment period, it has nothing to do with its murderous splendor. It does not have to draw the line that separates the enemy of the sovereign from his loyal subjects. It affects distributions around the norm. So it was also the time in the 18th, 17th, 18th centuries. It was also the time when the idea of race, the racial identity, the idea of race was making its place, and geographical origin, language, and religion was becoming important social markers. On one hand, the importance of life was recognized. On the other hand, there was the racial concept coming up in Europe in the form of eugenics. And we all know about what happened in the Holocaust. A kind of racial purification was taking place. People are being killed. So there was the question of sustaining life. There was the question of ending life. And it was also the time when modernity and industrial society were growing. Now you will use industrial society to end life or to sustain life. So Foucault states in this connection, and I quote from him again, how can a power such as this kill if it is true that its basic function is to improve life? If the basic function of biopolitics is to improve life, to prolong its duration, to improve its chances, to avoid accidents, and to compensate for failings, it is at this point that racism intervenes. So racism, the idea of race consciousness is very important, and it was entering the in the social discourse, in the public consciousness at that time. So it is somewhere between this dichotomy, the need to sustain life and also the need to kill, that I will situate the necropolitics in post-colonial Assam. So this is the theoretical orientation in which I am putting my idea about the post-colonial Assam and how necropolitics actually sustains. I mean, not sustains. It actually operates. Now, Achilles Membe talks about necropolitics in the context of colonial occupation. He talks about Palestine. He talks about Serbia. He talks about the places where a lot of violence is taking places. He's talking about Rwanda, the genocide which happened there. We all know about it. However, I have borrowed this term to interrogate how biopolitics inevitably led to necropolitics in the context of post-colonial Assam. So there is a transition, there is a movement from biopolitics to necropolitics, and I'm situating biopolitics within the context of the colonial Assam, and I'm situating necropolitics within the context of post-colonial Assam. So there is a division which I am making here. The rise in insurgency and counter-insurgency violence in Northeast India, and more specifically in Assam, is underscored by an apparent rhetoric on underdevelopment, resource extraction, immigration, and language politics. If somebody is aware about the politics and the literature, the social discourses of Northeast India and particularly Assam, they will know that it is always about underdevelopment, it is always about resource extraction, it is always about migration, it is always about language politics. People want more institutions to come, people want modernity to get in. But this is where I situate the problem. It is very nuanced and it's very multi-layered, and I want to interrogate these nuances which has created a problem in Assam. So in a way I want to discuss how modernity has become problematic in relation to colonial India. In order to understand the multifarious problems that exist in Assam today, one has to analyze how the structural changes brought about by the colonial rule to the Assamese society paved way for establishing the imperial structure that emphasized utilitarian principles and biopolitical exercise over its subject. Now, I have already told about the utilitarian principle which informed the West, and how this utilitarian principle was gradually seeping into the mind in the way of living of the people in Assam, in Northeast India. So how it got into here, and how the biopolitical exercise, that is the governmentality over its subject, which I would say, how it got in here, and how it was done by changing the structure. Now, every society has its own structure, and these structures are not built in just one day. These structures come into being as a result of various social interaction. It's a very natural process. It's an evolutionary process. But if you replace the structure in one day, you just remove a structure, bring a new structure. So you just cannot integrate it the way it should have, because the structure itself is an alien. But that kind of structure was introduced in Northeast India, in India as well. We have witnessed that the strong assertion of Assamese identity and Assamese nationalism have often been termed as xenophobic. You know, uh, the Mia poets, or you say, a lot of killings are happening in Assam, and whatever something happens in Assam, people will say, oh, okay, these Assamese people are very much xenophobic. But I think such kind of opinion comes from a very limited way of understanding what makes an Assamese nation. Assamese nation, Assamese people is not one ethnic community. All right. So if it is not one ethnic community, if it is a composite culture, people made up of many, I should not use the word race, but nevertheless, to make you understand, I'm saying people from different geographical places have come here and lived here for centuries and made a composite identity. So if it is the amalgamation of multiple races, how can it be xenophobic? So, if you do not know what the Assamese nation is made of, then you say that, okay, there's xenophobic. So this is something detrimental, I feel. Now, I'm not trying to justify the violence nor the counter violence that occupy the socio-political life of the people living within the geographical space of Assam. I'm trying to analyze the necropolitics that prevail in contemporary Assam as of today by situating its growth within the historical milieu from wherein it originally emanated. If we go back in history and identify how the colonizers systematically started regulating, controlling, shaping, and informing the very cultural and material foundation, the cultural and the material foundation of the Assamese society, we shall be able to perceive that there was a break from tradition into modernity, and how the bare life, how the zoo was transformed into bios, how bare life was transformed by the new circuit of biopolitics. A new circuit was being created in the context of colonial Assam. The starting point of this interrogation should be the official correspondence, I believe. Now a lot of people has to say a lot of things about what happened in the past, but the official communique, the official documents which were written by the British, these official correspondence, they are very important in analyzing what was really happening. So I have taken these official communique, these official documents, as a source to interrogate the same. Now, if we read the official correspondence, we shall see that the Assamese people lived through subsistence farming. They did not, the idea of surplus farming, and then selling it outside for trade, it never existed in that way. Yeah, there was trade, but in different way. They, in regard to agriculture, they believed only in subsistence farming, and the entire area of Assam, which was rich uh, in natural resources, which was to be exploited later on. So these are the two things that we come to know from the reports. Now, the bourgeois capitalist enterprise of colonial expansion was solely aimed at extracting maximum revenue by exploiting the land as well as the human resources. So how the human resources are to be managed? If the local human resources are not willing to be managed, then the resources are to be brought from outside. You see, understand the politics here. Large tracts of dense forests, wrongly designated as wasteland. Now, this word wasteland is problematic because Teranalia, wasteland, these are the terms used by Europe. Even this word wasteland appears in Foucault's text several times. What is this wasteland? These are actually rich. These are forest lands. They are rich in flora and fauna. It is sustaining human life. It is sustaining animal life. These are not wasteland, but they were designated as wasteland, and they were cut down. They were cleared for tea plantation and agricultural activities. These brought at least two changes in the infrastructure that allowed the colonizers to control the mode of production. So the mode of production was earlier different, and when the colonizers came, the mode of production, it changed. The local people could not cultivate the lands like they used to do in the past, and different kind of exorbitant rates of taxes were levied on the possession of agricultural lands and homestead. If you are having a home, you have to give tax. Earlier, such kind of taxes did not exist. So prior to these, the exchanges were done between and among people through barter system. There was no trade. If you read History of Assam by Edward Gate, uh, it states, the mode of transaction was not cash. People exchanged in coins. But when the British came, money became important. The currency became important. So it also had an impact on the life of the people. Also, the local people were displaced from their land, and many of them were forced to work in the tea plantation because they could not pay the tax on the land they possessed. If you read uh, uh, Pantar Raj to Swaraj by Amolendu Guho, he talks about this. The local people, they were just cultivating their own lands, but suddenly the tax were hiked by the British. So it was a kind of strategy used by them. So when the tax is being raised higher and you are not able to pay the tax, you are forced in a way to work for somebody else who will pay your tax. So this was some kind of manipulating the population, the regulating and controlling the population. So that is the focus of this entire colonial enterprise. In many ways, the land came under the direct control of the British government and was allotted to people who can pay tax. Now, there was another aspect to it. By citing moral and health grounds, the British had put a restriction on the private cultivation of poppy and mandated its procurement only through government sources. And they prohibited the cultivation of poppy on the basis of moral grounds. You cannot cultivate poppy and consume it. Morally, it is wrong. So the British banned it. But at the same time, the British legalized the buying of poppy from the government sources. So if you see the dichotomy between law and morality, where law starts and where morality ends, and where morality starts and law ends, it becomes very confusing. Because if you are cultivating your poppy at home, then that is illegal. And if you are buying the same thing for consumption from the government, then that's legal. So morality and law, they are used for specific reasons. As a result, a kind of supply demand chain was created to control the market. And that is a kind of capitalist foundation is being laid. You can control the mode of production, you can control the consumption, you can control the market. So this is one big change. The second one is when the British came here to extract the revenues, they had to hire people. They had created some offices, and they started hiring people. And when they initially came, they hired people. They brought people from Bengal. They brought the traders, Marwari traders from other parts of India. They brought the Bengalis from the Bengal. So a lot of people came in at that time. Now these two aspects, you know, the control over the mode of production and the offices, which I see as structures. Uh, these two aspects had affected the cultural foundation of the Assamese society initially, because they created the necessary environment for an overall structural change. For example, I'll give an example. There is a system called pike. Those who are not aware about the Ahom rule in India, Ahom rule in Assam, they will not know about it. There is a system called pike system, and in that, three or four pikes together will make a goat. See, this goat will function as one unit, and they have to render their service to the state. And sometimes what happens, one of the goat members have to go on some kind of specific work, sent to say, the king sends him for a specific kind of work. So the other three members of the goat will take care of of his family. So there was a sense of communitarian sympathy, a kind of relation being established. Earlier, the common people used to render their service for the other members of the goat. That helped in developing a sense of community, very much like the Aristotelian polis. It has a structure, it has an organization. There is a sense of participation where the members of the polis do participate, and the sense of responsibility is being developed from that. So that kind of Aristotelian polis, I'm not saying that it is exactly like that, but very much like that, also existed during the colonial, during the Ahom rule. And this participation by the goat members in various works like embankment work, dike making work, the tank making work, the road making projects, the building projects, these gave all of them a sense of collective social responsibility. A kind of social cohesion was created. This also generated in them a sense of belongingness. However, once the labor is being eliminated from his work, once the sense of attachment and the social cohesiveness is disrupted by the introduction of money and by the change in the social infrastructure, it brought about, and it was being brought about by the colonial administration. The social values also started eroding. Some people from the same community is being hired by the British, and they're used, and these people are used against their own people. So there was also a kind of division which is created within the society, and the British did it in a very grand way. The people who were employed by the British as laborers or in other positions started receiving payment in cash. This cash was then invested in purchasing the goods which were manufactured mostly in Britain. British brought the raw silk and other raw materials from Assam, and they sent it to Britain. And this gave some kind of cash in the hand of the local people, who started purchasing again from the British the goods which were brought by the British from Britain. And this was happening throughout the 18th and the 19th centuries. And when Foucault, he talks about in his Madness and Civilization, when the workhouses were being created, and when some people were working in the workhouse and producing a lot of things, then there was kind of unemployment in the other workhouses. What about the unemployment which was created in India? If you read Shashi Tharoor, how the indigenous industries had been, he talks a lot about this, how the indigenous industries has been destroyed. So you are sustaining some people in Britain, in France, in other European nations, and you are exploiting the resources here. So all this seems to be very much related, but Foucault doesn't talk about India in his book. Okay, so with this kind of change in the social structure, in the purchasing and sale of things, the lifestyle of the people were greatly affected. Now, since the British wanted to extract maximum benefit, they opened up the areas to foreign immigrants. Their purpose was to extract revenue. So they will take all opportunity to exploit that. Earlier, the Ahoms hardly allowed the outsiders to leave their kingdom or to enter their kingdom. Now, I am saying this again from Edward Gate, that the Ahoms, it doesn't mean that people did not come to Assam. People did come to Assam, but that kind of free flow of immigration of people from one place to another place was restricted. It was not there till 1770s, from 1770s in Assam, uh, under the Ahom rule. However, with the coming of the British, the host of immigrants not only affected the Assamese people culturally, but also economically, socially, and linguistically. And the introduction of the new education system also, it was the new education system was introduced to morally uplift the people of the indigenous people. That is what the report says. The report on the province of Assam by Mills, it says new education system was not introduced to give them job opportunities. It was introduced to morally uplift the people. Since the medium of education at that time was Bengali, it brought in more complications. It has time and again been alleged that the Bengalis had misled the British in adopting Bengali language instead of Assamese as the medium of instruction. And till today, this is one issue which is being raised up in Assam from time to time, that the Bengalis had misled the British in introducing Bengali language by stating that, okay, Assamese is not a language but a dialect. This instilled a sense of loss and deprivation among the Assamese, and this is well founded. But if we examine the official correspondence between the British officials, we shall see that it was some British officials and missionaries who insisted on continuing the medium of education in Bengali. So it was not the Bengalis who were doing it, it was actually the British. And this is again, I am citing from the report which was published by Mills. It was in two official letters. They have written, they were insisting, no, these textbooks are not available in Assamese language. Therefore, we should continue in Bengali. One of the reasons. Second reason, since Assam or the Northeast was considered as a frontier of Bengal, it was considered as a frontier of Bengal, and the court, uh, the court which was functioning there, the official language of the court was Bengali. So Assamese cannot be introduced. So these were the logic which were given by the British officials and the missionaries at that time, and these are very well available in the reports which are available, which are published, which is published by the Publication Board of Assam. Therefore, I think the historic discord between the two communities was premised on a misleading hypothesis. Next, the people who received education started looking for jobs because they felt that the objective of receiving education was to get an employment in the public offices. This is something which we still believe, that if we have education, we need jobs. We are to be given jobs because the government is giving us education, so we should be given jobs by the government. So this kind of idea existed since 1850s. In one of the reports which has been published, it shows like there are not sufficient vacancies, and the British official, the officer is saying, we are giving them education not for jobs. There are no jobs available. Why are they looking for jobs? So these are the things which are being written in the report, and this has prevailed since 1850s. Many of them who received education thereafter did not engage in the trade or other agricultural activities, and therefore a new class of educated unemployed people were created. Furthermore, the British also brought the Bengalis from Bengal to perform the official works, and whenever any future vacancy came up, the Bengalis brought in their relatives to fill these vacancies. So this was an obvious factor that created much resentment and discontentment among the Assamese people since 1850s again. So you take away our resources, you take away our land, you build up institutions here, and you don't employ us. You are bringing people from outside. So obviously anybody will react. So this was very natural. So this movement, of the vast population from one place to another for furthering the colonial interest has caused irreparable damage to the socio-cultural fabric of the Indian society. Many laborers who were brought to work in the tea garden hardly survived the journey, and the ones who reached safely had to live in the most deplorable condition. These tea garden laborers, even after 2 centuries, the conditions have not improved. My colleagues are here in this webinar. So we had visited the tea gardens, and we saw that they are living in the most deplorable condition even today. Nobody talks about them. We are not interested in talking about them. They have been living like that for the past 2 centuries. So these institutions, which were established by the British Empire, they still continue to exploit people in some way, and we are not concerned about that. We talk about democracy. The workhouse, which were built in France and England in the 17th and 18th century, where the socially deviant were forced to work, as mentioned by Foucault, we find a parallel of that prevalent in Assam till today. And nobody raises a question to that. Assam earns a lot from the tea industry, but what about the tea workers? How much are they paid? 230, 40, 50 rupees, that's most. They don't have education, they don't have proper health care, and there is a lot of politics going on in their name. Therefore, the colonial annexation of Assam, of the territory of Assam in 1826 becomes the moment of departure, where the old transactions and cultural life of the Assamese people were gradually replaced and substituted by the utilitarian mode of life. This is the point of departure. And this was so evident in Europe, that how the utilitarian mode of life, what the utilitarian mode of life can do. And it was introduced in Assam from 1826 when the British took over. It was also at this time, in the first part of my lecture, I have told about the racial consciousness coming up. Foucault talks about the racial consciousness. It was also at this time, after the 1820s, that the racial and linguistic consciousness started growing among the people of Assam. The influence of the Western mode of production and cultural transformation initiated a new pattern of consumption. So it is not only production, it is also the consumption which plays a role, that not only created competition, but a sense of cultural otherness. Now, what is this cultural otherness? When you talk about modernity, you talk about, at that point of time, today we talk of modernity in a different way. At that time, what was being a modern? English education, dressing like them, going abroad for higher studies, so on and so forth. So you are modern. That also produced a cultural otherness. If they say that before the advent of the British and the annexation of Assam in 1826, the Assamese identity was never rigid. The people did not belong to a homogeneous group, as I told earlier. They belonged to a heterogeneous group. There was openness and malleability, and these have allowed the composite culture to integrate all those who came into its context, not the immigrants, not only the immigrants who have come from different parts of India, but even the Ahoms who have come in 1228 from the Union province and who ruled Assam for 600 years. They assimilated into the fold, getting enriched and enriching the host culture as well. So this composite culture, which was growing, which was accepting people from different places, how did it suddenly stop? Why did it become hostile towards the Bengalis? Why it could not consume? Why it could not accommodate the Bengalis coming, or the other people coming from different places? So these are to be viewed. That what is the problem? There could be many reasons for that. Firstly, the horde of immigration. Lots of people come, plenty of people coming to your place at a time. So that is one of the problems. The reduction in the size of the land, the growing competition, the dwindling of the resources. These are the many problems which are to be seen, and how the government handles it will determine the fate of the nation in a way. However, after 1826, as the flow of immigrants continued unabated under the British rule, the local people feared becoming a minority. On one hand, huge tracts of land were handed over to the immigrants by the British, so that more revenue could be generated. On the other hand, with a new imperial infrastructure, the old infrastructure was removed, new imperial infrastructure. By new imperial infrastructure, I mean the courts, the railways, the educational institutes, the tea gardens, the public offices. All these things were created. So, with the new imperial infrastructure to support the revenue generation, policing, and resource extraction from Assam, lot of people were brought from various parts, especially from Bengal. Now, documentary evidence shows that what started as imperial design to generate revenue later on transformed into a political tool for administration. Why Bengal was partitioned in 1905? It's not to divide. It's not for administrative convenience. It is to divide, the people, not on religious lines, but on linguistic lines. But later on, it functioned in religious lines as well, as we know. So, then again, the inclusion of Sylhet at that time. Sylhet was uh, included in Assam in 1874, and that also increased the flow of immigrants. And along with the settlement policies that allowed peasants from Bengal to come and settle in Assam, only widened the rift between the two communities. Now, uh, this had been a problem since then, since the 1850s. This had been a terrible problem. And since then, the Assamese people have been fighting two wars. You can say on two fronts. Number one, the expulsion of immigrants. Secondly, the expulsion of the British. So they were fighting against the immigrants. They were fighting against the British rule in some way. So, how the British subjugated the Assamese people for 100 years, and the ensuing peasant revolt, which like the Patharughat Run, Fuloguri Dhawal, there are a lot of peasants revolution happening in Assam at that time. Then the exploitation of the tea plantation workers. All these are well recorded in history, and I will not repeat. I'll talk about the challenges which were created at that time. The challenges were, I broadly classify them. Number one, the loss of land. Number two, new social structures were created by the European bourgeois. Number three, the immigration. And number four, the language consciousness associated with the racial identity as well at the same time. And the linguistic consciousness brought about by the introduction of printing press, education system, and vocational requirements. That is specifically the language question, which was emerging at that time. So these were the four challenges which was there till 1947. There were other challenges as well, but these are the four broad challenges which existed. Now I'll come to the post-colonial Assam. Like after India got its independence, what happened? So there is a transition. Now, when you are allowed to rule, when you gain independence, the power is transferred. It was called the transfer of powers. When the power is being transferred to you, how do you handle it? The problems would have ended. Did the problems end? The problems did not end. It became more complicated. Now, the question that remained after 1947 was as to how the new state will handle the existing crisis without violating the constitutional rights of its citizens. There was a whole lot of people who have come here. There are a lot of people who were deprived of their land and resources. So, how do you negotiate? How do you take a policy? And I think the succeeding governments really mishandled the thing which had aggravated this problem. Instead of solving, they have aggravated the problem. At various times, we will see how people had been brought into Assam, and that had really aggravated the problem. Now, the real challenge had been like, how can you restore what had been lost to the indigenous people? At the same time, how do you do justice with the people who have come here prior to 1947? Now, this is a very complex situation, and it has no simple solution. Uh, there were other problems which existed in Assam, and these are also to be understood in relation to the earlier problems which had existed. Now you see in the news the damages caused by flood. It comes up every year. Every year the flood not only causes loss to life and livelihood, but it also erodes a huge chunk of landmass from the areas adjacent to the Brahmaputra river. The classic example being Majuli. Now, the people who lose their lands, agricultural lands and home, they become landless and they go in search of a new home. and new agricultural land. Now, in this relation, I will refer to one particular instance. It's the digression, but I think I should say this. There was a man who had whose name was Sanjay Ghosh. Those who have read about the history of Assam, the recent political history of Assam, they will definitely know about Sanjay Ghosh. He was actually working for the poor people in Majuli. He was trying to make them socially aware. He was working for the society. Every year there was loss of land, so he was using the local technology of making the dikes with bamboo to prevent the soil erosion. He was successful, but when he was successful in his endeavors in helping the poor people, why was he killed? Every year the government earmarks a lot of money for the construction works. The contractors take up this. A percentage of these definitely goes to the politicians. So these contractors who keep on doing the same work year and year over again and keeps extracting the money from the government, the taxpayers' money. So if somebody opposes that, not directly, but by helping the poor people by uh, creating a structure which will stop the land erosion, you're posing a threat to those people. But it was said that he was not killed by the contractors; he was killed by the Alpha at that time. And we all know that how the nexus of contractor, of the Alpha, and the political leaders were at that time. Now it has been well exposed how Alpha had been used as a tool, as a state tool. That um, the presenter before me, she was talking about the police being used by the state, but the rebel organizations are also used by the state, not only the police. Now, this was one problem. Second, Assam was producing a lot of coal, lot of tea, lot of oil, and other minerals, and a hefty amount was being added to the exchequer of the Indian government. But the region had received very little attention regarding the development. This was the second issue. Third, the competition for jobs and landholdings brought the indigenous people in direct conflict with the immigrants. These were also the problems which existed in the post-colonial Assam. These were also the initial issues which had been raised by the conscious citizen and the civic society, I would say, and the political leaders in Assam from time to time. However, very less has been done to address these pertinent issues. The language question remained, the immigration issue was addressed by various leaders, but with political limitation. They addressed to show the people it was only a facade. You can say, oh, we oppose the immigration. It was only a facade, but there were immigration people who were coming all the time. So it was only a facade in a way. The Assam Sahitya Sabha, it promoted on the language front, it worked on the language front. All Assam Students Union, it fought against the exploitation of resources and the immigration of people into Assam. So there were different civic bodies, there were different organizations and leaders who were speaking about this from time to time. Since the state government and as well as the central government failed to solve any of these above mentioned problems and instead abated the immigration of people from East Pakistan, the patience of the people finally wind away. It eroded away and it culminated into what we know historically as the Assam movement, which started in um, 1979 and which ended in 15th August 1985 with the signing of the Assam Accord. That is a very important book in this relation, Assam, the Accord, the Discord by Sangeeta Barua Pisharoti. It gives a lot of insight into the politics that went into the bringing of immigrants, the killing of people, the necropolitics. And it is within this socio-historic background that the necropolitics has to be viewed in the context of Assam. That who will live and who will die, who decides that. In the years preceding the Assam Accord, it was one of turmoil and uncertainty, and every political party wanted to take advantage of it. Sangeeta Pisharoti, in her book, she writes that in the Congress government, which was at the center in 1974, tried to make use of the illegal immigrants as their dedicated vote bank. The position fully exploited, the opposition fully exploited this opportunity, but could not make any damage to Congress in Assam in 1977 election. However, in the following years, there had been a major shift in voting patterns. As Congress tried to make use of illegal immigrants as their voting bank, the Janata Party in Assam appealed to the Assamese society through ASU to resist the Congress, who they alleged had been sheltering the illegal immigrants. Along with Janata Party, Bharatiya Janata Sangh, and the Rashtriya Swayam Sevak, what we know as RSS, they had been supporting the ASU to resist the immigrants. However, there was an ideological difference between the RSS and the ASU. The ASU protested against all kind of illegal immigration, but the RSS rather wanted the Hindu Bangladeshis who have come. There is no other homeland, so they have to be settled here. That had been the stance of RSS in the beginning. But ASU stance is very clear. No, this is our homeland, and immigrants are immigrants. We cannot divide them on the basis of religion. Now, with the right-wing Hindu group backing the protest of the ASU, it provided the right-wing Muslim organizations. They were also working side by side. Jamaat-e Islami and Jamaat-e Ulema. I am quoting this from Sangeeta Borua's book, who has cited this. These two groups, they wooed the Muslim immigrant population to their side, creating a polarization of vote banks on religious lines. Now, organized violence had rocked the region since the days of Assam agitation or Assam movement. Not only the civilians, but also the government officials fell victim to it. On 6th April 1981, the Commissioner of Assam, it's a very important position. See, the Commissioner of Assam, his name was E.S. Parthasarathi. He was killed in his own office, uh, through a time bomb. He was blown off. So, in a powerful person like the Commissioner of Assam is being killed in his own office, somebody must have come there and fitted the time bomb there. So, how the things functioned at that time, who was a friend, who was the enemy, and the government officials are helping whom, who is whose enemy, who is to be killed. It became a very messed up affair at that time. So somebody as powerful as a Commissioner of Assam is he's being killed in his own office by a time bomb. Many doctors, engineers, based on their ethnic identity, had been ruthlessly murdered by the mobs. So these are historical truths. It cannot be denied. Thus began a spree of violent human slaughter since then that culminated into the regime of anarchism based on communal identity and the infamous Nelly massacre. Japanese had done a research work on that, and the book is on Nelly massacre had been published. It documents very objectively what happened, what went before that, what went after that, and people talk about it till today. So in that Nelly massacre, 3,000 people had been killed. Whereas the immediate cause of the massacre was cited like, the government was pushing for the 1983 assembly elections. But Pisharoti and Sanjay Hajarika, they are of the opinion that the immigrant population in the tribal belt and block area, community conflicts and rumors have actually triggered the violence. So, uh, it's not the election which is the de facto, the actual cause of the violence, but it had been the other causes which are in the background. And this has been cited by Sangeeta Borua Pisharati and Sanjay Hajarika in his Rites of Passage. Although the information, but you see, the another aspect to this is like, although the information about the violence was communicated beforehand, it could have been stopped. But although it had been communicated, it did not stop. So this raises some kind of doubt, who is operating behind this. You cannot really say whether the state agency, or whether the politicians, or whether the underground, or whether the civil society, who is working and how it is working. It is very difficult to say, but you can realize it the way it is functioning, and that's why it is relevant to talk about all these things. So this Assam agitation actually, which began on Gandhian model, through Hartal, a non-violent model, it took a very ugly turn, and it took many innocent lives. And with the murder of this man called Khargeshwar Talukdar, it further added fuel to it. And then there was a spurt in communal violence, and it followed unabated. And then the inception of Alpha. It added another chapter into the infamous killings in Assam. And what started as ideological war ended up as killings for extortion. Alpha, they had been ideologically very strong, helping the poor people, running a parallel government, kind of parallel government where people who do who do socially nefarious work, they will be punished. The doctors cannot practice outside the hospital. The teachers cannot give tuitions who are working in government institutions. So they started regulating. It was a good ideological thing that they were doing. But at the end, it ended up like, it ended up in extortions and killing innocent people at the same time. Now, Sanjeev Borua, Sanjeev Borua is a kind of authority when you talk about nationalism in Assam or Northeast India. He has done a lot of research work. Now, he quotes from D.D. Thakur. He says that the loss of faith in the efficacy and the credibility of the government apparatus is so great that the distinction between Alpha, a rebel group, ASU, a civic body, a civil society representative of the civil society, and AGP, a government body, the one who is running the government. The distinction between these two, which existed at some stage, now remains totally obliterated. Who works for whom? Uh, you're not sure. So this is quoted by Sanjeev Borua in his book, The Durable Disorder. Now, later on, this situation was exploited by the political forces further, which successfully drew a wedge within the Alpha by creating lucrative opportunities for the surrendered Alpha members. Now, among the Alpha, who's who actually the Alpha never talked about as such, about the immigrants, or they understood, they realized that the state cannot do justice, so we should form a sovereign, a separate state. We should be creating a separate nation. So that was their ideology. Now, within the Alpha, there was a group which was created. They would surrender, and these Alpha were used by the state to hunt and kill the members, the family members of the Alpha. So, the people are turned against themselves, and they are used by the state as a kind of ad hoc counter insurgency force. Uh, According to Sanjay Hazarika, which he writes in his book Strangers No More. So, you see the anti-immigrant thing which started here, it lost its relevance then, and it started with a different cause, and it ended up with killing a lot of people. And how this is happening, and how the state is organizing, or how the state is trying to control the entire thing should be the focus of the necropolitics. And if we bring its relevance today, we see the anti-immigration issue has been raised up again with the bringing of the Citizenship Amendment Act. And in this relation, there are other issues like the detention centers, which are being talked about from time to time. There are no separate detention centers in Assam. The 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 jails are being transformed into detention centers. So you lose the identity, whether you are a criminal or you are a detained. You are being detained there. So you are not a criminal, but you are living with the criminals there. So these detention centers are there, and many people who could not prove their identities, maybe they are not aliens, because some of the evidence have come up recently. In Barpeta district, one recent evidence was found that all the members of the family are Indian. Only one was who could not prove his identity. He was sent there, and eventually that person died. Such thing happened in Gwalpara district also. His name has also come in the NRC, but he was detained wrongfully, and he lost his life. A lot of people have died in the detention centers, and then this kind of controlling the life of the people by threatening them. Uh, it had been evidenced the way the voter thing had been handled. Nobody is denying that there are immigrants, there are illegal immigrants who have come to Northeast India. Nobody is denying that. But again, there are innocent people, and who who will vouch for them? Who will save them? because at times what happens, the police who are to the border police who are to visit those villages and find out if there are illegal immigrants, they just randomly pick up names. They just randomly pick up names and say that, okay, these are illegal immigrants. And the onus is on you to prove now that whether you are a citizen or not. And then your name is listed as a D voter. So once you are a D voter, you cannot have many privileges of being a citizen. So you lose your citizenship. So how do I control you? How do I exercise my power on you? If you are a citizen, if you are a legal citizen, I cannot exercise my power on you. So I take away the citizen, not directly. I say, okay, I doubt you as a citizen. So in that way, I curtail some of your rights, and then I operate. That is the mode of operating in Assam that's going on. And one of the victims was Mahendra Mohan Chaudhary, the the famous person, the chief minister. So he belonged to a place where there are a lot of Bengali Chaudhurys, and that random deletion of names was happening, and his name was also included, and his name was cut off from the voters list. So he also became a victim of that. But since he is a local and he was an Assamese, he rescued himself from that position. So this is the state of affair which is happening in Assam, and this is how I read the necropolitics, that how it controls the life and death. And at the end, I would like to refer to the killings which took place in 2018 near Dhola Hodia Bridge. Uh, this anti-car or anti-cab thing was going on, and there was a lot of debate going on. People were threatening, on social media, on television, that okay, if the car is passed, then we will kill the Bengalis, we'll kill them, we'll kill a lot of people. And it ended up actually in the killing of five innocent people who had nothing to do with this agitation, who were living here, who were citizens. They were killed by whom? By unknown militants. And who has provoked these militants to come and kill them suddenly? And why were they killed? Based on their names, because they had a name which revealed their identity. So this is how necropolitics is being functioned. Now, I'm not saying that somebody is to be blamed for this, or how can we handle the situation. I will end my talk with reference to a particular text, which will actually help us understand the situation better. Now, if we try to blame a community for what has been happening in Assam, if we try to blame the Assamese community or any other community for that reason, there are a lot of organizations which are fighting against government atrocities, against the immigrants. If we try to blame them, will that be the right thing to do? That what is forcing them to take such kind of drastic action? What is the way out? What is the responsibility of the government, actually, the people who are in power, who can really make a change, who can really make a difference? Are they really acting sensibly? So these are the questions we need to ask instead of blaming. And I will relate to one particular text. It's a novel by Pankaj Seksheria. The name of the novel is The Last Wave. It's a fictional work. Although it is a fictional work, it is based on research. There is another book by Pankaj Seksheria, The Island of Flux. So it's a collection of essays where he actually, in this novel, he shows like uh, the island of Andaman and Nicobar. There were a lot of indigenous people living. Those are the homeland. They had been living there for thousands of years. But once that people started people were shifted to the jail, the Kalapani, Sajai Kalapani thing. The people were shifted to that cellular jail, and when they were released, they were given a plot of land in that region so that they can settle down there. So the story starts like that, a person from Pakistan and a person from another part, they go, and how they meet up there, and how after being released from the jail, they marry and they settle down, and how the colonization process of the Andaman and Nicobar Island had begun. You know, I think that Andaman and Nicobar Island can be seen as a miniature of what is actually happening in the Amazon, of what is actually happening in Assam. Now, these indigenous groups, if you see the data, you will see the if you see the data, you will see that the population is coming down day by day. Some of the tribes, some of the indigenous tribes, they are they are no longer to be found. One particular tribe, I think it's Onge. It's totally obliterated. It's totally gone. They have died out. Why? The question remains why. They remain outside the biopolitics. We view them as something savage. We try to intrude into their space, and since they cannot fight back, we are gradually grabbing their land, their flora, their resources. And today the population strength is so big in Andaman that it is actually causing damage to the island. The flora and fauna is being damaged there. Who is responsible? The colonization process, the people who are migrating from here to Andaman and Nicobar Island, and the indigenous people, the tribal who are living there, they cannot fight back. They do not have the means to fight back. Since they cannot fight back, since they are not participating in the politics, in the decision making, they are not taking part in the decision making, in the strategy making policies of the government. They are reduced into nothing. They are being, killed in a way. We are participating in their extinction. Now, if we read this novel and just imagine, we feel bad for these tribes who are dying out in Andaman and Nicobar Island. Had the people of Assam been not resisted, have they not resisted, they would also have met with the same fate like that of these tribes in Andaman and Nicobar Island. So that is, I think, is very relevant to understand that nobody is responsible in a way except the state, the political force which is operating behind the state and which is trying to exploit the resources. And behind all this there is the structure, the capitalist structure, which is, I feel, responsible for today's condition. The condition that which was created in the colonial India in the 1826 has culminated. The condition which was created in 1826 in Assam has culminated to this kind of necropolitics today. So there is a relation in understanding that. With this, I end my talk. Thank you for listening to my lengthy talk. I do not know if it made sense to you. I tried to bundle up a lot of ideas. Thank you.